parents, whether that's through webinars, master classes, trainings. They're all the same. It's really about getting the information so that you can make informed decisions about your child. And that's important. It's important for parents to know what to ask for. It's important for parents to know what their individual child needs, right? Because every child is different. And when parents are given a diagnosis, that's all they're doing done. That's all that's done is they're just given a diagnosis, right? Nothing more, nothing less. No one tells parents what autism is. They give you a piece of paper and say, get therapy, get ABA, which I will just put on the table. I am not a fan of ABA therapy in terms of hours and hours of our children sitting in a clinic setting. But we will talk a little bit about what therapy is. How do you choose therapy for your child, right? Because parents do have a right to make decisions. I know professionals put a lot of pressure on you to do certain things, but it's your child. And I wanted to do something for the Jacksonville Autistic Society so they could have a recording in their files for new families, families who have been with them, to be able to go to this recording and say, okay, what is this early intervention thing, right? What does that really mean? And a lot of times parents are given this, you have to do everything by 5, or it's fast paced to get all the skills developed before they go to school. And the reality is all children are different, whether they have an autistic diagnosis or not. Everyone is different, right? If you have more than one child, that is considered typical developing, whatever that is. I know we have some sort of standards we follow. However, if you have more than one child, you know that each of your children does things at different times, and everyone has strengths and everyone has challenges. So today we're going to simply go into early intervention and what that means, right? What does that mean? So first, I think it's important for parents to understand, because we will have families that will watch this that are either waiting for a diagnosis, families that are new to the diagnosis, and what we want is for parents to understand the difference between a diagnosis and a classification. Like, what is the difference between the medical information you get from the doctor and the educational information you get from the school? And so let's go with, do I need a diagnosis, right? Let's start with that. Needing a diagnosis when your child is a minor is important because you're able to get access to services, whether those services are through private therapy, whether those services are with Medicaid or services for children with disability, whether those services are with the school system. And we'll talk about how the medical diagnosis connects and doesn't connect to the educational classification. But the important thing about getting the diagnosis, which I know is a lot of fear for parents, right? In terms of, I don't want my child labeled. I don't want my child to have a stigma. I don't want my child to think that they cannot. It makes me feel uncomfortable, right? To have a child that is autistic, because my perspective of autism without knowing anything before this diagnosis is it's a behavior disorder. It's, they're out of control. They can't do anything. They're constantly misbehaving. That's not what autism is. And I know we're not here to talk about what autism is. I'll probably insert a couple of things. However, autism is not a tragedy. It is not a level of functioning. There's no 1, 2, 3. Those are numbers that are used within the medical diagnosis simply for providing services. And the medical field and all of those logistics behind insurance and diagnoses and all those things need numbers, right? Everybody wants to look at numbers. I want you to not look at that number. Don't worry about the 1, 2, 3. Where your child is now is not where your child is going to be 3, 4, 6 months from now, right? 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. You are learning. You are going to provide your child with supports. So if someone says your child is, if a doctor gives you a diagnosis and they say your child is level 2, that really doesn't mean anything. Don't let that bring you down. Don't overread into that. Autism is a spectrum. And whether someone is a verbal communicator or a non speaking communicator with a device, it doesn't mean it's a functioning label, right? There are lots of individuals who are verbal communicators but have a lot of sensory challenges, and it's really hard for them, right? So it's not, oh, they're verbal, it's all fine. That high functioning labels is not really relevant to determine what your child needs. But it is a number that is necessary for behind the scenes to make sure that you get services. But I want you as parents to know, please don't let that number determine or dictate your child's destiny, right? Because it's really just a number and it means absolutely nothing. All right, and so when you think about that number, right, and that medical diagnosis, the medical diagnosis is necessary to get the ball rolling for you to get speech therapy or early intervention with the before school system from birth to 3, right? That's what that diagnosis would do. So if you want to get services for your child, if you want to start early intervention, then a diagnosis is necessary, right? For you to get that ball rolling. And so thinking of that in terms of that medical diagnosis, where you get that diagnosis varies depending on where you live. I wish it were as simple as it used to be, but now it's gotten more complex. So do your due diligence in your area, ask other moms and support groups in your area to find out about where you can get that diagnosis. Now then, once you have that medical diagnosis, right, and let's say it's time for your kiddo to go to school, that doesn't automatically give your child services at school. Doesn't automatically give your child an IEP unless you have been in the early intervention services before age 3 because you received a diagnosis before that. Or maybe you just had speech therapy for your kiddo and then you got a diagnosis of autism and now you're doing a new IEP before your child goes into school at 3. So you can get a medical diagnosis, you can have an early intervention assessment where your child starts services with the early steps or their different names, and that will get you in the door, right? Let's say you didn't get a diagnosis before age 3, your child has not been in early intervention services with the governmental sort of educational state department in your area, and you're just getting a diagnosis, right? What does that mean for your child going into pre-K, going into kindergarten, going into first grade? What does that mean? That means you now have to take that medical diagnosis. You need to go to your child's school district. I always say if you can, go to Google, look up your school district, look up the special education department, call and find out how do you get the ball started in terms of an educational evaluation. Because your child cannot have an IEP, which is an individualized education plan that protects them unless they have a classification. So with the medical field, the medical community, your child will get what we call a diagnosis. But in the education system, it is a classification that is federally mandated. This is not by state. Now, every state has a different system for evaluating. However, the classifications are federally mandated, and there are very clear requirements as to how a child qualifies under those classifications. Just because, unfortunately, just because a child qualifies for, or should I say, just because your child has a diagnosis of autism does not mean they're automatically going to get a classification for autism. And that's a tricky part, right? Where a lot of our kids are academically very proficient. And so sometimes the school system says, well, they're academically fine. They don't need any supports or services. Yes, they do. So if you have your kiddo with a medical diagnosis, you go to the school, you request in writing an evaluation so that your child can have a classification of autism within the educational system, then you want to get an individualized education plan in place, which is the IEP, so that your child can have accommodations and supports. That is very important. If the school, and this is very important for those of you who are in these early stages, if the school says no, they don't qualify, you have a right to appeal, and there's another process to that, right? But you don't want to send your kiddo into the school system without supports. I know we feel like, oh, I don't want the school to know. My child can just kind of, get in there and maybe no one will label him if he has this. You want your child to have supports. It protects your child. It really does. Because if your child is not supported in the school environment, which is a very different environment than the home setting, then they're going to struggle, right? And they may not struggle year one in kindergarten. They may not struggle year two in your first year in first grade. But then when they start putting on more demands, there's more transitions, there's more sensory overload, then we start to see that impact, right? Then we start to see behaviors, oh my gosh, and then everybody swoops in when we should proactively have things in place. And that's where that educational evaluation with a classification is important, and it impacts your child's education by providing supports that your child needs. And that is super important. It really is. All right. Now, in terms of parent participation in this whole process, right? Let's say that you have your medical diagnosis and maybe you even have your school classifications, but we're talking about early intervention. So if we think about the diagnosis, right? They give you a piece of paper and say, go get these therapies. What does that mean, right? No one tells you what speech therapy is. No one tells you what occupational therapy is. No one tells you the purpose of play therapy. Why is my child going to occupational therapy? Why is my child participating in speech therapist? And then what is my child supposed to be getting from these services? And how do I determine if the service is benefiting my child? How do I determine which therapist to choose for my child? So let me start with speech therapy. Speech therapy is critical, right? It is super important because if your child does not have a method of communication, it really doesn't matter if they know their letters, if they read early, if they can count to 300, if they can do amazing things and you're just fascinated by that, right? Yay, they're academically excelling, but they don't have a way to show us what they know, right? Because they cannot communicate. They don't have a way to make the request made. They don't have a way to let you know, I really would prefer to have chocolate cookies instead of vanilla cookies, right? They do have ways, but they're not ways that are efficient means of communication, and sometimes it's an inappropriate method of communication. So speech therapy is critical. However, what's important is for you as a parent to know what to ask the speech therapist, right? How to know which speech therapy or speech therapist is best for your child. And the dilemma around this is everyone doesn't have the same resources, right? It just depends on where you live. But there are some key things that I would like for you to take from this in regards to speech therapy. One, you should definitely ask your speech therapist how much training they have had in regards to providing speech therapy for autistic children, right? Because it's a very different speech therapy for autistic children than it is for children with communication delays or communication, articulation, language sort of things that we're working out, right? The other thing that's super important is when your child meets their speech therapist and you go into the setting, if the speech therapist does not allow you to either sit and observe through a two-way mirror, to either come in at the last 5 minutes so she can show you or he can show you what they've done so you can follow through at home. If they have not said, hey, we're going to have a camera and you can watch what's going on. If they have not given you a folder with homework to follow through on the strategies that they have been implemented, then you need to ask for those things. You are a participant in your child's process of building skill set, right? Parent participation is key. Going to speech therapy once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week for 30 minutes an hour is not going to build communication. You have to follow through at home. So have a working relationship with your therapist, right? And the speech therapist, it's important that you work together It's important that the speech therapist take in what you know about your child and how they communicate. And it's important that your speech therapist understand your child's needs, because the sensory component needs to come in, right? Your child needs to be regulated for speech therapy. They should be using visual supports. There are so many things that should be going on in a speech therapy setting that you need to look out for, right? And the other part is speech therapy in regards to developing a method of communication. That takes time, but you should see progress quickly. It doesn't take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months for you to see progress. That means it's not working, right? You need a new therapist, or they need to change what they're doing. It doesn't take that long to see small steps of growth. The other therapy that's critical is occupational therapy. And occupational therapy is important for fine motor skills, motor planning. It is important to make sure that your child has bilateral coordination, right? No retained primitive reflexes. And I know I'm throwing these words at you, but I'm throwing these words at you because, these are the things that the occupational therapist should tell you about when they do an evaluation or assessment. You should know that your child's fine motor skills, if they do need to have some work done on building those, then okay, what does that look like, right? What does that mean? What are you working on? What can I do at home? Motor planning, right? That impacts being able to feed themselves, dress themselves, get up and pick up their shoes and put on their shoes. Motor planning impacts communication verbally, right? That's speech. Motor planning can also impact using the AAC device, or even pulling pictures from a choice board if you're introducing PECs. If your motor planning brain-body connection is not efficient, your child's going to struggle. So what do we need to do? Get occupational therapy to support their needs, right? Work on those fine motor skills, work on those hand strength. The other part that's important around occupational therapy is sensory integration, right? You should know your child's sensory needs. Your occupational therapist, if they're not trained, right, in understanding sensory integration and sensory processing, and they can't develop a sensory profile, right, a peek, a look into how your child processes sensory information and what their needs are, then you need to ask them to refer you to somebody who can do that. Doesn't mean you have to leave them. You may need two speech therapists, or maybe one therapist that does the evaluation and the therapist that your child has a good rapport with to carry out some of those recommendations. When you go into an occupational therapy setting at a clinic, it should have fun swings and trampolines. It should have big equipment that you don't have at home. If that occupational therapy setting only has a table and a chair that your child sits at, that's not what your child needs to be experiencing. They need to have things to move their body and to regulate them, right? I'm not saying that those occupational therapy clinic settings are not good. I'm saying they don't have what your child needs. An autistic child needs sensory regulation activities. They need to be able to move their bodies, and sitting at a table and a chair is not always the best way to build skills. The other therapy that is sometimes available and recommended is play therapy. And play therapy is, it's a specialized therapy that can help with lots of things, right? Social engagement, facilitating speech and communication. It can help with your kiddo, even sometimes initiating things, right? When they have access and freedom to take the lead, right? In that play therapy setting. So that's another one that sometimes is available, but it's not as accessible. Music therapy is also great when you can find a music therapist who understands how to do music therapy with autistic kiddos. Sometimes physical therapy is necessary for pelvic strength, sometimes not, right? But these are things that you can ask about, and these are things that these assessments and evaluations should be covered by either the school setting. You can ask for that in your initial evaluation, or it should be covered by your insurance. So just thinking about those different therapies. But before I leave this slide to talk about the therapy options, one of the things that I think is really important is for you as a parent to know that your participation is key. And when I say that, I say you have to take that initiative. You have to build, and I don't want to say you have to build, but you need to make sure that the therapist your child is working with is going to work with you. That is very important. I always say it is a huge flag if your child's therapist is not willing to communicate with you, not willing to let you pop in for the last 5 minutes. I do understand as a therapist, it is difficult for parents to be in a therapy setting with kiddos. Sometimes they're very different, right? But your little one, you should be able to know what's going on. You should see what's going on. You should definitely be a part of that process because you need to be able to carry out all of the activities and the strategies that the therapist is doing. These are things that you can do at home to build your child's skill set. So, speech therapy, super, super important because we have to do what? Build a method of communication which reduces your child's frustration. It gives them a way to tell you what they know. It gives you a way to communicate their needs and wants. And that's what we want for our children, right? And that's not always going to be verbal. It's not always going to be verbal in the beginning. But those are things that we're going to talk about in the course around communication. So that's next up next week. In terms of occupational therapy, it is also, I think, very necessary to at least get an assessment, right? I personally think every child needs occupational therapy just to make sure those little subtle things are addressed, because a lot of times the struggle in the learning environment is by unaddressed fine motor, unaddressed shoulder stability, unaddressed retained primitive reflexes, unaddressed motor planning issues that no one looked at, right? So I always encourage parents to at least get an evaluation from an occupational therapist that works with children with autism and can give you concrete information and has provided or participated in training. That is what I think is very important in the early intervention stage is parents, you have a right to ask anyone who's working with your child, whether it's the teacher, the therapist, how much training do you have specific to autistic children? Not, oh, I've worked with autistic kids before. That's not good enough, right? I don't really know what that means. I need to know as a professional, I need to know as a parent, what training have you had, right? How do I know that you understand autism? Going to college as a speech therapist and an occupational therapist, that doesn't teach autism. It doesn't, right? And therapists have to take things outside of what they are taught in the college level. So there's lots of stuff online. I tell parents, you know what, if your therapist has not had training, but they have a really good rapport with your child, both take a training together. Find a training. You both take it together and learn together, right? This is a journey. I guess some people say it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We don't have to build every skill set before first grade. And every child is different. And the schools need to accommodate. That's why that diagnosis is so important in terms of getting that educational classification and pushing for that as well. All right. This is the one that I wanted to talk about in terms of support systems, right? Support systems, and what does that actually mean? So support systems are two-part, right? One part is team of professionals. The other part is family support. And in regards to team of professionals, since we just finished talking about therapist, your team of professionals should be your child's therapist. If you have a very good pediatrician that's working with you, if not, switch. I know that's not always easy, but your pediatrician should work with you. They should not reprimand you. They should make you feel uncomfortable. Your pediatrician should not judge your parenting, and your pediatrician should want your child to get early intervention services, even if that's not with a specific diagnosis of autism. If your child is not communicating and they're really frustrated and they're sort of not showing signs of building communication, you need to get speech therapy in place. Even if you don't have an autism diagnosis, your pediatrician should at least be able to give you um, something to refer you to a speech therapist. So I just wanted to put that little tip in there. But in terms of your team of professionals, it's your child's therapist, any doctor professionals, right? Whether it's a pediatrician, developmental specialist, or even if you have a great ENT, right? Whatever professional that has been working with your child and knows your child very well is part of that team. And the team of professional also includes your child's daycare worker, right? Maybe even your child's nanny or babysitter, or even your child's teacher if they're in school, right? That's the team of professionals. Everyone that is working with your child that's not necessarily family, right? That team needs to be built. And sometimes you're going to have to trade, right? Team members. Sometimes you're going to have a speech therapist on board, and then you're like, oh, this is not working. The rest of the team's great. We need to get someone in new, right? Your team should be communicating with one another. We live in a technology world. Email is great. Group chats are great, because if everyone is on the same page, if you have a speech therapist at your child's school or a speech therapist that goes to your child's daycare, and they're not talking to your child's private speech therapist or vice versa, that can be really confusing. And it's also, everyone's kind of spinning their wheels, right? Your kiddo, not saying they can't have more than one therapist, but everyone should be working on the same goals, right? They can just maybe do it in different scenarios with different ways, depending on whether it's in the classroom setting or the clinical setting. However, everyone should be working together. And if you don't have a group chat or a group email, then if you're fortunate enough, maybe you can even have like monthly meetings, right? To get everyone to talk about and what's going well, what's not. And sometimes kids do things in some setting that they don't do in another, and we can learn. So what did you do to get them to do that, right? How did you support their needs so they were able to demonstrate that skill set? So always make sure that you have your team of professionals, and there's some really good advocacy groups that do things, that do some webinars around having that binder, right, of everything in one place. And I will just throw out a tip, just because this is related to early intervention and some strategies. It is really, really a good idea to develop a separate Gmail for your child and all of their team of professionals. And the reason I say that is because lots of emailing will happen, right? Lots and lots of emails, lots of follow through with appointments. If you have them all in one place, in one email, then you and the other parent, right, whoever else is on your family support team as a part of it, can access, if that's part of what you do in your family dynamic. But it's also easier for you to not miss anything, because sometimes our regular emails get clogged with a lot of junk email. So I always recommend that. And the reason I recommend a Gmail is because sometimes your therapist, or sometimes you can have a folder in a Google Drive that shares information as well. And it's important to have as many things in one place as possible, because you're going to have a lot of reports over the years, a lot of paperwork, and anything that you can do to make sure you start organizing that now, whether it's a binder, getting that separate email is a really good, very good stress reliever. I can't tell you how many parents have implemented that strategy, and it's really helpful to have that one email just for your child's stuff, right? That's coming from the school and the therapist and the doctor. So the other part of that support system is around family support, right? Family support can be hard. It can be tricky. It can be difficult. It can be frustrating. And when I think of family support, I think in terms of, don't start big, having the expectation that everyone's going to join you, right? You're going to get pushback. You know who you're going to get pushback from. You are going to get folks that, say those terminologies like, he doesn't look autistic, nothing wrong with that child. And, there is nothing wrong. Your child's just autistic. We just need to find some supports and develop some communication and regulate their sensory system. However, family can be difficult, right? So you want to get a family support system, and the way to do that is to get one person to join you that's going to support you, and then you just keep building on that. And the way you build on that is if you demonstrate and model the things that you want for your child, whether it's strategies for communication, whether it's making sure they're sensory regulated, whether it's making sure they get to therapy. If you advocate for that, model those things, and you get someone else in the family to model that with you, slowly but surely, other family members will join your support team, right? I will share a story about a mom years ago who received a diagnosis for her first child, and she had a brunch and invited close family and friends. And she had a brunch because she loves throwing events, right? So she threw a brunch and said to everyone, the reason I have gathered all of you is because we just received a diagnosis of autism for such and such, and I need your support. This is what I need from you, right? And so let me know if you can support me. This is what I need. Let me know what you can help with. And if you can't help, I understand, but I'm telling you what I need from you, right? And then her second child was diagnosed, and she had another event, right? Now, you don't have to have an event. You can have a barbecue. You can have a brunch. You can just have a Zoom meeting. You can just call everyone over for dessert, right? It doesn't really matter. The reason I share this story is because I love that the mother set the tone of, listen, I am accepting this diagnosis. This is the journey that I have. This is the journey my child has, and I'm going to support my child, and this is what I need from you. I need your support. And then when she had her second child, she said what other support she needed for him. So that is a way to get people to join you, is to present in a way that it doesn't feel so uncomfortable when you talk about autism, right? It's, and I know it's a process. I get it. We get a diagnosis. That's not what we expected when we got pregnant. But the reality is, and I say this all the time, when anyone gets pregnant, has a baby, decides to become a parent, we don't know what life is going to throw at us. We don't know. We don't know what life is going to throw at us if we don't have children, right? So we have our babies, and we have all these dreams, and some of us have more expectations than others. Everybody, has a different parenting perspective. But what I will say is, when you get to the place where you are accepting that your child is an autistic individual, and that neurodivergent processing system and the way they see the world is really okay. Yes, there are challenges, but it's really okay with supports, then everyone will follow. Well, maybe not everyone, but most folks will follow. So thinking in terms of, and I don't have this quote up, but a really good friend of mine, not good friend, but a woman that I really admire, who is an autistic individual, has a quote that I often share, and she says that you don't grow out of autism, you grow into your autism by supporting and accommodating your needs. And that's really what it is, right? So you are now at this stage of, what does my child need? And that's where this work comes in the beginning, right? That early intervention stage. Even if your diagnosis is early intervention at age 8, right? Even if you just received a diagnosis, still the same process, just a different starting point. All right. The other thing that's important, which I kind of already sort of mentioned this, is parenting an autistic child. And when you're parenting an autistic child, you have to parent differently. You have to parent with intent. You have to do a little bit more work. Parenting is already hard work, and do a little extra layer of work. But if you look at it from a perspective of, listen, I'm empowering myself, I understand, I know, I'm willing to do the work and commit to it so my child can grow into the individual that they're supposed to become, then you can commit to it, right? Just know that parenting an autistic child is parenting proactively with intent. That is how you minimize chaos. And that's another topic. However, what I want to encourage you in this early stage, I know that you're boggled with paperwork and therapy and running here and trying to figure out all these systems. It's a lot. It really is a lot. Lean on folks who've done it before, join groups, participate, ask questions, talk to other moms. But you really want to educate yourself by participating in webinars and even such as this, 6-week series where we're going to talk about different topics. But you want to educate yourself so that you can make informed decisions for your child. And even parents who are parenting more than one autistic child, those decisions are different for each child. A visual schedule looks different for each child. I work with families that have twins, and the twins are not using the same visual schedule. They have different supports in place. They have different needs. I have families that have 3 children that are autistic, different ages. They each have different needs. So you have to educate yourself, participate in webinars, take advantage of as many things, weed through the stuff that feels yucky, take in what resonates with you, and apply what works for your child's individual needs. And speaking of feeling yucky, I forgot to mention, if you are working with a therapist and you are sending your child to a therapy setting and it feels yucky, your child's crying all the time, your child's upset, your child doesn't want to go, follow your instinct, get out of there. Bad therapy is not better than no therapy. It can be very traumatizing and it can actually hinder your child's overall progress. So just wanted to put that out there. I forgot to mention that. Back to educating yourself. Once you understand and you educate yourself on the school system and how that works, what your rights are, what therapies your child needs, what the therapist should be doing for your child, then you can move into the phase of advocating, right? Advocating for what your child needs. And advocating doesn't mean you have to be ugly. It doesn't have to mean you have to be mean. Advocating is saying at a brunch, I need your support and this is what I need. Advocating with the school system is advocating to make sure your child not only has accommodations and supports in place, but that those supports are being provided and that the school is being made accountable, right? Advocating for your child with the therapist is making sure you have information on what they did during that session with your child. You have information on what you can do to carry over those activities into the home environment. Advocating for your child with the therapist is asking them, hey, what are you working on? Can you explain to me why you're doing that? Can you explain to me what goal that relates to, right? You have a right to advocate for your child, and the way you do it differs, right? Just depends on the dynamic. And I always tell parents, if you are the parent that gets emotional, right, and can't always communicate as effectively because your emotions are involved, because they should be, it's your child, let the other caregiver do it. Or bring your mother-in-law, bring your mom, right? Bring your dad. Bring someone who can help you advocate so that you're heard, because sometimes when we're yelling or we're really upset or we're really emotional, we can't really say it in a way that needs to be said so that people hear it from the other end. So that's where that support system comes into play, right? Advocating also looks like this. If your child is working on a communication method and that requires them to go to their AAC device or go to their PECS book or use sign language or even practice using their words, and you have family or friends over and your child walks up to them and looks at them while they are, I don't know, eating a cookie, and you are trying to get your child to communicate, right? If the person just gives your child a cookie, you want to advocate and say, I really appreciate that you shared with him, but we're really working on communication and he needs to make that request. So you can prompt him by saying, what do you want? You can prompt him by saying, do you want a cookie? Do you want one? Do you want two? Because we are trying to create opportunities for communication. Now, remember I said you're parenting with intent, and being proactive. That's where that proactive comes in terms of saying that before, right? So if folks come over to your house often, if you visit family members often, let them know, hey, you know what? We're working on this method. He's been doing really good at that. So anytime you see him do this, ask him or prompt him, right? And the other part of advocating with family, friends, and anyone else that you are going to have your child with is advocating for their sensory needs, right? So, for example, if your child does not respond well to processing information of people coming into them to hug them, right? You need to let other folks know. And I know it's hard for grandmas and aunts, but you need to let them know it's really difficult for him to process that information. So let my child come to you, right? Or don't hold them down to give them hugs and kisses. Or sometimes certain perfumes, right, are really difficult. So sometimes you have to advocate and say, we really love coming to your house, but you wear a lot of cologne and he has a very over responsive smell system, right? Sensory system. So it's really, really difficult for him to be around you, right? Nothing against you personally. Can you possibly not wear your cologne when we come to visit, right? Those are things that you can do that help your child to be able to navigate the environment. And I say all the time, when someone says, well, so are you saying that, we all have to do things to accommodate, the autistic child? Pretty much I am. Because the child, right, the autistic individual, even though it is a difference, even though it is a different way of processing, even though it is not a broken system, it's just a little neurodivergent, right, in terms of what we typically see in terms of processing information, that it's still that disability component, right? It can still be disabling. So your child can participate in the family event when they don't have overwhelming smells, right? Perfectly fine. We've accommodated the environment. They're able to participate and join in. But when we don't do that accommodation and we wear that perfume and cologne, then we're really putting them in a situation that can be disabling, or they're not going to be able to participate. We put ramps for those who have wheelchairs. We have sound beepers so that people who are blind can cross the street. We have hearing aids for those who have a hearing impairment. Our children, autistic children, deserve and have a right to accommodations as well. And those of us making adjustments for them should not be that big of a deal, because I don't have the disability, right? I mean, I know we are looking at this from a positive light, but there's still the reality of it's a disability in certain environments. A person in a wheelchair is disabled if they can't get into a building that has no ramp, right? That's disabling them. But if there's a building with a ramp, they're able to get around independently. So we need to remember that with our kiddos, right? They deserve to have their accommodations, and sometimes we need to make those adjustments. Often we do, especially when they're little. They are learning, they are growing. I have to say this all the time, and there was a great meme: children are not adults. We should not expect them to act like adults. We should not expect them to regulate themselves and discipline and control their impulses. That's not even something adults do very well sometimes. But they're children. That's why they have parents that are guiding them on this journey of life until they become adults, and we still have to guide them a little bit. So my message to you is educate yourself. Take what you like, take what applies to your child. Every webinar is not going to be great. Every piece of information is not going to be useful to you, but take what you can from that, right? And then advocate for your child across the board, and understand that, yes, advocating for your child sometimes pisses people off. Sometimes people won't want to talk to you, but your child is a priority, and that's where you need to stand, right? Because if you don't advocate for them, who is? And how are they going to learn to advocate for themselves if you're not doing that? And it's hard because, some people get upset with you. Family members can get an attitude, but your child is depending on you. And in my book, when it comes to my children, if I've made a decision for my children and I need people to support me and they're not going to support, then I don't want my children to be in that environment, right? I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying I don't want you to talk to family. I'm not saying you need to be ugly with your child's therapist or teacher. I'm saying sometimes when we advocate for ourselves or our children, people don't like it. But that's the whole point of advocating, right? So that your child, has what they need so that you can do what? As it says on the slide, support your child's needs, right? You cannot support your child's needs if you're not educated on what they need. You can't support your child's needs if you don't advocate for them in different environments. That's part of the deal. And yes, it's hard work. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it is frustrating. I am not saying that it is easy. It takes time, it takes commitment, it takes sometimes sacrificing, it sometimes takes shifting the entire way you run your life. There are some parents that have had to live separately where maybe they live in a rural area. I have a family that lives on a farm, and mom lives during the week in the town, in the city, where her child gets excellent therapy and she comes home on the weekend. You have to do what you have to do to get your child what they need, especially when they're younger, because when you wait too long, I'm not saying it can't be done, it's just harder. It's just harder. So start learning and understanding what your child needs when they're young. As soon as you get a diagnosis, whatever age that is, don't feel like, oh no, I didn't know, my child didn't get diagnosed till 5, all these times I missed out. Doesn't matter. Just start now, right? This is the idea of this early intervention course, is to get you to start thinking about, what information do I need? How do I make those decisions? It's so much to process. It's a lot. Allow yourself time to be frustrated. Allow yourself time to scream, and allow yourself time to say, you know what? Right now, I can't do it. I'm going to pass it on to someone else. And sometimes we just need a break. We just can't always get a break every day, all day, right? We've got to do the work. I just really want parents to be empowered, because when parents are empowered, then they can advocate for themselves and for their child. And when you advocate, you can support your child's needs. And when you support your child's needs, they grow up to be who they're supposed to be in this wonderful, kind of wonderful world now, but in their wonderful world, right? And they can't learn that if we're not modeling that. So we have to model that advocating. And we have to model supporting their needs so they know what they need. Although they really know what they need, sometimes we just don't understand it. All right. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today and taking the initial steps towards parent empowerment. And I know it's a lot. I really, I'm talking to you. I know it's overwhelming. I know it's a lot. And so I want to encourage you to just learn, right? Baby steps. This is your initial step. Okay, now I know I need to ask the therapist these questions. Now I know I need to take some webinars. Now I know I do need to empower myself, right? It's important for my child. Now I do know that communication is important. And it's important, more important than academics. Our children learn. Learning is not the difficult part for our children. The difficult part is when they don't have their supports in place and they can't show you what they know. That's the challenge for them, right? And so communication is one of those big things. And communication communication method needs to be taught with the child's needs in mind. Not what's convenient for us as the adults, not what's convenient for us as the therapist or the parent. What works for your child? And don't let anyone tell you that it's too early to start an AAC device or technology. Download a free one on your phone. Try it out. See if your child presses the button and says, I want, or points to juice, right? While those verbal skills are building, if they don't come, that's okay. Your child will be able to communicate. There are lots of individuals that communicate with technology devices and they're non-speaking. And they are out in the world. They are independent. They are doing things. I think one just gave a speech for valedictorian. Another 2 guys just finished their degree in engineering, right? People who are deaf communicate via sign language, and they are out in the world, married, having children, and working. I'm not saying your child you're going to guarantee your child's going to get married and have children. I'm not putting that out there. We all have a right to choose not to get married and not to have children, or vice versa, right? My point is that There are different ways to do things, and we need to understand that our child may have to do things differently, and that's okay. What do we need to do to make sure their supports are in place so that they can become who they're supposed to be? And you can learn more. We're gonna have this for the next 5 weeks. We're gonna come on, and I think I may do it a little differently next week and have it with a Zoom link so that I can share my screen with a video of me talking. Apparently that's the way it's done now, so the reason you can't see me is because if I do stop sharing, the video live will end, and we had some problems last week, so I at least wanted to get the information to you. And next week we'll have a Zoom link, and it'll still be live, it'll stream live, but it'll just be through Zoom so that we'll see a different viewpoint. However, until then, what I encourage you to do is, if you want to check out some of my free webinars on my website, if you want to follow me on Instagram, and I have a podcast that I am doing, and we're also going to have Jacksonville Autistic Society come and join us on that podcast as guest. And the podcast is all about shifting the narrative on everything autism. It's myself and Torin, who is an autistic gentleman, and we have professionals on, we have autistic individuals on, and it's just a great platform for all of us to sit down and talk about what it looks like to shift that narrative, right? And so back to why we're here today. We are here today or you have been following this presentation in regards to early intervention, understanding what you need to look for, understanding what supports you need in place, understanding how important it is for you to empower yourself and advocate for your kiddo, and then everything else is just proactive implementation of strategies as you learn, right? I also want to just put a big shout out to Jacksonville Autistic Society. They are sponsoring these courses, and this is really exciting that I'm able to present this information for families, because the more families that are empowered, then the next generation, the better it will be for the next grown-up adult generation of autistic individuals, because we're going to do the work now, so it's much easier for them when they are adults. So Jacksonville Autistic Society is doing some good work. I know they're building their platform of providing as much as they can for families, and we will be back next week to talk about, I think it's communication. And let me know if you have any questions. You can message me. You can, I'm going to look through the comments now. That's always hard for me. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to mess up the live, right? So I'm literally just keeping the screen because we had such difficulties last week, and seeing me is not important. And you're very welcome, Dimitri. I'm glad that some folks joined. I know that it's summertime. It's hard to choose what's the perfect day to do a Facebook Live. We just want to get the information out there. It's going to be recorded. Folks can come by at their convenience and watch the replay. I will work out with Jacksonville Autistic Society to have a link to the replay of this on their website, so families who are not on Facebook have access to this information as well. And I will check back later if there are any questions after people have watched the replay. But thank you all so much for participating and working with us through this technology glitches. I was telling Dimitri last week, I know it's frustrating that we didn't get to do the live the way we wanted to, but there's been a lot of glitches with a lot of things that I've been trying to watch myself, right? And Facebook makes changes, and we all have to keep adjusting. So remember, let me do a quick recap, right? You want to get a diagnosis and a classification, right, to get services and protect your child at school. You want to participate, choose your therapist. I know sometimes we don't always have options, but at least ask those questions and join in and learn together if you both have to. Get your support systems in place, and remember, parent proactively with intent. Like, really, you have to parent with intent and be as proactive as possible, and that's where the education comes in. All right. Have a great rest of the Sunday. Bye, everyone.